I'm Britt Bingold, and you are listening to Season 4 of Learning Unlocked. Welcome to Learning Unlocked. Educators are the key holders to unlocking learning for students. Today, as always, my goal is to provide you with resources and tools, the keys, to enable and accelerate learning for all students. Let's get started. Welcome to episode 36 of Learning Unlocked. Today I am joined by my fellow instructional specialists, Wendy, Peterson, and Julia Salce. In this episode, we will be discussing the assess domain of our district's instructional framework. If you are interested in starting at the beginning of this series, be sure to head back to episodes 25, 27, and 29 before listening in today. Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
Before we begin discussing the assess domain, I want to ask, in both of your opinions, what is the root of resistance for teachers when administering assessments in their classroom? Let's first take a look at administering summative assessments.
So I think that the biggest resistance when teachers hear assessment beyond the standardized assessments that come to mind is time and purpose. Like, I don't have time to give all these assessments, or what is the purpose, or I don't buy into the purpose of this particular assessment. So I don't see why it's worth my time. So I think time and purpose end up being two big pieces of resistance.
Okay. Wendy, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think one of the issues is that the focus has always been on summative assessment. And so when we turn the focus to formative assessments in all the varied ways that they can be presented and used, then I think it becomes a whole lot more practical, and teachers are more accepting of the word assessment once they truly understand what formative assessment is.
With summative assessments, do you think a lot of it also between time and purpose is also just the pressure of like the big tests, finals, beginning of the year, end of the year tests, any of those large state tests? Do you think it's just like the idea that it's only a snapshot in time of what their kids can do? So there's just a lot of pressure that also surrounds it?
Well, yeah, and I think that's what Julia was alluding to. When we give a test that we didn't create, that someone else has imposed upon us, whether it's the state or the district or whatever, I think it's natural to have some resentment about it.
Well, and how the data is going to be used in those particular assessments. When we talk about the state assessments, that data is not used necessarily directly at the classroom level. So for the teacher, it's not as relevant for those kids in her classroom right now.
Right.
And it's data that is sometimes used against teachers and districts as well. And so I think that can cause some unhappiness.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so those, I think, are some of the hindrances that we get when we start talking about summative assessments, just kind of like, but what about, why do teachers resist formative assessments?
Personally, I think it's because they don't understand what a formative assessment is or what it could be. I know that for many years, I thought a test, like a 100-question bubble sheet test, is a summative assessment,
Right.
and a quiz is a formative assessment. And so,
me too.
If that's your right, thank you. I thought I was the just crazy one. But no. If I thought that for years and years, then it seems kind of pointless.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think teachers understanding that formative assessment, the majority of them are already doing. Right. They're just maybe not purposely tracking the data while they're doing it. Mm-hmm. But formative assessments are happening in the classroom every time the teacher makes a small pivot based on the looks on kids' faces.
Right.
And so we have, I think that the big pushback is helping teachers understand what formative assessment is, and that it's not what Wendy just said. It's not quiz after quiz after quiz, because then we come back to, I don't have the time for that, and I don't see the purpose in that.
Right. Absolutely. So that's the big misconception that I would love for us to change right here today on this podcast.
Okay, let's do it. So I think what comes up is, and it leads right into our first concept under the domain of assess in our instructional framework, is actually entitled balance assessment. So the crux of this domain hinges on teachers developing and incorporating both formative and summative assessments through specifically a PLC process. So if we're talking about creating this idea of having balanced assessments throughout our units of study, what does that look like in practice when we're talking about creating those in a PLC?
Well, I think before we can actually talk about a PLC discussing these assessments, we have to make sure we really understand what the two are.
Yes.
And so we'll go to the analogy that we use all the time when we're talking to teachers about assessment, and that is, who are you going to be? Are you the doctor or are you the coroner? And I'm saying coroner, not corner, every time people think I say corner. Coroner. If you're a doctor, your patient comes to you, they have symptoms, you assess those symptoms, and you determine based off of those symptoms a plan of action. You give them a prescription, and then you instruct them to check back in with you in a few days or a few weeks. As teachers, formative assessment are those opportunities where we are observing what the students are understanding and not understanding, what skills they're gaining, they're not gaining, through any structure. It does not have to be through an actual test.
It doesn't have to be like a quiz or a test?
It does not.
Okay.
It can be in your exit tickets. It can be that you're taking down information as they're discussing different prompts that you've given them. It can come in any format. The idea is that you're collecting information about what they know and don't know, and you're determining a plan of action based off of that information. And that's a formative assessment. So the formative assessment results in immediate change based off of the data in real time with those students. The coroner is the summative assessment. So a coroner's job is to take someone who has passed away and determine a cause of death. They're looking for symptoms in the same way that a teacher might be looking for symptoms in the classroom, but their goal is to determine cause of death. There's nothing that person, the coroner, can do to bring that person back to life. The cause of death is just information that will inform perhaps future people,
right,
and what they do with them, but it does not affect that person. And that's a summative assessment. So there really is no such thing as a formative and a summative assessment. It's assessment that is used formatively or summatively.
Yes, absolutely. Let's say that one more time and slower.
Yeah. And say it with talking about, I don't remember who the author was, but we talked about this a lot.
Yes, I don't remember who the author was.
Oh,
the,
good.
The person who, and I forget what book. If I remember it, I will have Britt post it.
We read a lot
in the show notes. But when I was originally reading about assessment and formative assessment, they talked about the guy who originally used the term formative assessment, and he did not name formative and summative assessments. He said assessments can be used formatively or summatively. So the same test given in two different classrooms can be used in two different ways. If a teacher uses the information from an assessment, and again, that doesn't have to be a multiple choice test, but if a teacher uses the information from an assessment and she changes her lesson plans or she pulls intervention groups based off of that assessment the next day or within a few days, she's using that assessment formatively. If the teacher next door gives the assessment, records the grades, and moves on to the next unit, she may be taking notes. Her intentions are good. She's taking notes on next year when I do this, I need to remember to teach this a little bit better. But the next day they move on to the next unit. She's giving a summative assessment. So we
Mhm.
have to ask ourselves, do we as teachers want to give more wellness checks or autopsies?
I'm about the wellness checks, just in case anybody was wondering.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the wellness checks are what's gonna really make the biggest difference for those kids now, and the more often you do a wellness check, the healthier you're going to be, which in this case, in this analogy, the stronger the students will be in their learning and be prepared for a summative assessment. And then that could take a lot of the pressure off of those big summative assessments if we are actively doing formative assessments daily, and checking up on those kids and giving immediate feedback, which we're gonna get to a little bit later.
Well, and could I add that it kind of goes back to my misconception where I was, saying a formative was a quiz and a summative was a test. I was the queen of the end of the unit 100 question bubble sheet test where we had the scanner. I mean, I love those. It took the kids the entire hour to take. All I had to do was put them through the scanner. It provided me a percentage score. It was a beautiful, beautiful thing. I I don't think I would give any of those kinds of tests or assessment anymore, where it's 100 multiple choice or true false questions. That is not how I would assess, because mostly you can only assess basic knowledge there. What was Romeo's last name? What was Juliet's last name? What are those cycles of a frog's life? Okay, I want beyond just recall. And so my assessments, whether they're formative or summative, need to be able to assess their deeper learning as well as their thinking.
Right. Yes. Yeah, so I think all of that, it has to be in some type of balanced format. And the way you can do that, now that we kind of understand the difference between the two, is you really need to plan that within your PLC. But we've also talked about, how sometimes we just talked about this, Julia, like you on the fly,
Yeah.
you have to make those shifts and adjustments, and those aren't going to be planned out in your PLC. So how do we get assessments basically like intentionally planned up front? And then how do we kind of like shift sometimes when we're teaching and realizing we need to make a formative assessment quickly, or we've already made one and we're like, oh, that's not working and we have to adjust. So let's look about intentional assessment planning when we're with our PLC, and then we could kind of maybe jump back a little bit and talk about like that on the fly formative assessing.
Yeah. So I think when we were talking yesterday, I talked about there's instinctual formative assessment and then there's
Hmm.
intentional formative assessment.
Yes.
Intentional formative assessment is going to be planned with you, hopefully, ideally with your PLC before you even begin the unit. These are your formal formative assessments where you as a team decide that we need to check in based on our past experience. We know there can be misconceptions at this point, or this point, or this point, or this point in this particular skill. So as we're working on this unit, we need to make sure at this point where we've traditionally seen misconceptions, we are doing an agreed upon formative assessment. So we can determine as a team, do we need to teach it differently? Do we need to teach it again? Do we need to use a different instructional strategy? If we've known in the past that this particular skill has a struggle point or a misconception here, how have we taught it in the past? And is there a better way to teach it? And then see with your formative assessment at that point if they have improved or they're performing better. Because then you as a PLC know that you can use that particular instructional strategy to avoid that misconception. So those are those planned formative assessments. They are, you could, if we go back to our analogy, these are like the yearly wellness checks where and I'm not saying yearly when I'm talking about the teacher in the classroom, but these are planned visits to the doctor. We know every year we go in for this vaccination or this flu shot at this point in time. We have this wellness check. So these are those planned appointments that you as a PLC decide to deliver.
Yes. Okay.
On the other side of that, though, is you as the teacher, you are teaching in real time, and you are teaching human beings, not robots.
That's what I was going to say. There are real people out there.
Yes, and your group of students is never the same from class from year to year, or if you're a secondary teacher, from class to class. And you're going to do that instinctual observation of what your kids are doing, and you're going to collect that information. So if you notice that kids aren't following along with you, or you're starting to see the distractions or the heads bobbing, you know that somewhere you lost them. And instinctually, if you're a good teacher, you are going to give a quick on the fly formative assessment. Maybe it's something as simple as a turn and talk. And you're going to walk around and you're going to listen to what they're saying, or you're going to do a partner A B summary where partner A is going to summarize what they just learned from you, partner B is then going to summarize back what they just learned. And you as the teacher are walking around and processing that, and all the misconceptions that you're hearing at that point, you're going to address right then and there, and then you're going to continue moving forward. And those weren't planned with your PLC. You may not be, and actually you're really probably not at that point, collecting a lot of data per se. It's just that instinctual teaching on the fly formative assessment that will keep the kids engaged and with you and learning.
Yeah, so I think having intentional ones built in is really important, but we also have to know that there's going to be instinctual moments that we are going to have to formatively assess. And we already know that a lot of teachers do this; they don't even realize they're doing it.
Right. They're not labeling it.
So I think that's important to start off with, as far as why it's important to make sure you do develop formative assessments ahead of time, because they're very important to collect that kid data of what's happening in the classroom, not just after a test, right, after an autopsy. But it also is important to understand that you are going to have those moments that aren't planned, and that's actually really good. You want to give immediate feedback.
Right.
So, concept 2 includes what we are calling learning targets and success criteria. We have discussed what these terms mean in our last podcast episode in this series. It's called Instruction Always Under Construction. It's episode 29. So, we're not really going to go over what those terms mean here, but they are a very powerful tool when it comes to assessment. So, how do learning goals and success criteria provide opportunities for students to have self assessment, reflection, and kind of give them models for mastery? We can go through each of those separately, but let's first talk about how do learning goals and success criteria provide students opportunities for self assessment?
Well, we go back to our doctor analogy. Most of the time anymore, we don't just wake up sick and decide, I'm going to the doctor. Instead, we go online and dangerously so or not, we go to WebMD or whatever the symptom checker sites are to see if it's something that we need to go see the doctor for.
Right.
Do I just have a cold, or is it the flu?
Right. I can't tell you how many times I've Googled cold versus flu symptoms.
Correct.
Or now I have to Google cold versus COVID.
Right. I know. Yeah, exactly. That's a whole different.
The world changed.
The world has changed. But yes, we still do. We still Google that, right? Like,
Yes.
what are the COVID symptoms for this new variant? Like, I don't know.
So when we're talking about learning in the classroom, providing students with learning goals and success criteria gives them the opportunity to self-assess whether or not they need help. It's the symptom checker. Can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? Like, where is it exactly that I need help? Have we learned it yet? Should I know this yet? Do I need to go see the teacher? And so that's where that criteria is going to support student learning.
Okay. And these are these learning goals and success criteria. We call them the clarity map, and those are in the hands of the kids. So this is not something that's just posted or that the teacher references once. It's something that they should be referencing all the time. Right. And then the kids have it in front of them and they can check off. And, the teacher really should be prompting, like, hey guys, today we're doing blah, 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 blah. Look at your clarity map. And here you can see this. And because it really, otherwise the kids aren't going to be able to use it as a self-assessment unless it's in their actual hands, right?
Right. And so, of course, I didn't know about all of this back in the olden days, but I did have something similar. And at the end of the period, the students kind of rated themselves on whether they had learned what I did call it the learning target back then. and what their effort was. And then I was able to, just by walking around, either at the end of the day or the class period, or the next day, I would be able to, and the day out, by the way, is better, but I would be able to check their knowledge, also check their self assessment skills. And I had given them a little cheat sheet to help them with that self reflection. I wish I had
Right.
done even more now, of course. But sometimes we are not, I don't mean we're dishonest with students, but we are not upfront with them. We're not explicit with them. And there's no reason to keep learning secrets from kids. Tell
Uh-huh.
them, here's what we're doing, here's how we're going to get there, here's how you're going to know at the end if you've got it. It makes them partners in the learning with us.
Right. So, how can we use the map, the clarity map with the success criteria, but also any other forms? Because you brought up self reflection, and I think that's really important. They do a self assessment of where they're at, but they also can reflect. What are some ways we can have students reflecting more in the classroom? That way, we can be doing some formative assessments, walking around and checking.
Well, when we talk about students reflecting, I would definitely make that visible, that reflection visible for the teacher in the classroom. Because as the teacher, if I'm having my students reflect in whatever particular task we're at, they've got the success criteria. I don't want them to just tell me what they think they know or don't know. The
Right.
power is in what they think they need to do next.
Yes.
So the power in reflection overall, yes, it's good to know where you're at. It's motivating to know that you're moving along.
Hmm.
But the true benefit comes in that metacognition of, okay, I'm here. I have to get here. What is it that I need to learn next? And how am I going to go about making that happen? Am I expecting the teacher to teach that? Has the teacher already taught that and I still don't know it? What am I going to do there? And so having that plan of action is really what supports further learning.
Right.
Well, and
So they could even, oh, go ahead, Wendy.
no, I think that occasionally, not all the time, but occasionally in all subjects, it's important to have students uh, verbalize it in order to use the language of learning. But I also think it's important for them to really write it out sometimes. And I'm not just talking about an exit ticket here, I'm talking about reflection on the clarity map and writing that out as a way to reflect on their learning.
Yeah.
Everybody who knows me knows I'm an advocate for writing across all content areas, and that's one way to do it. I would give them sentence stems, paragraph frames to begin with, of course.
Yeah. And even having them highlight concepts that they feel that they've mastered, or then highlight the concepts on the clarity map that they need to, they're a little fuzzy on, and then having them do that writing of reflection. And then even after they write it down, they can do a pair share or a group share so that the teacher can hear it, or they could put it on maybe a poster paper, or they could even shoot it up onto like a Padlet wall, just like some reflection so it's visible for the teacher as well.
Well,
Because I was really guilty of always doing reflections like at the end of my unit.
Right.
Like let's summatively reflect. Like it was kind of like
Right.
they kids liked it. Like it was like a Socratic seminar. We would
Right.
just discuss the unit, but it like again, it didn't really. I should have been doing that along the way,
Right. We're all guilty of that, my friend.
right? So it's like I loved hearing their reflections. I just didn't do it often enough.
right. And I think something that's really important when we have students reflect is it's when they say that they know a concept,
Mhm.
they should be able to direct themselves back to some proof of that.
Right.
So whether it's they know, if it's just I can define whatever, do they know where that's at in their notes? Do they know where that's at in any of the activities that you've done? And so I'm an advocate also of using the clarity map as a table of contents of their learning. So what
Nice.
tools do I have? What resources do I have that support each of these statements? And the benefit of that is you're having students go back and you're putting order
Mhm.
to some of their ideas that exist within their notes, or they're putting order to the different activities, or meaning or relevance to the different activities when they can reference those. Also, as we build forward on that clarity map, it's an opportunity for them to have their own created little review guide by the end, to go back through.
And this also pulls in quite a bit of metacognition, which we know is also very important for students.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so you're weaving so much into uh, the formative assessment, the clarity map, the reflection. I mean, I think you're getting a lot of bang for your buck, so to speak.
Right. By revisiting those things also we're engaging in some space practice, which we know is really good for the brain and learning. So they really do not only help us see where they're at and we can formally assess, but they're formally assessing
Mhm.
themselves, which is I can't remember where we read this, ladies, but I guess kids are really accurate at this. Like they're not far off or not very
Right.
wrong when they do a self-assessment.
Right. The Hattie research supports that.
Okay.
Mhm.
I know it's Hattie. It's somewhere. I don't know which. It's too many books.
Well,
Okay, and
and
so oh, go ahead.
let me add too that, and we say this with almost everything we talk about on here, you can't just say to kids, here you go, reflect. And so, no, you're not going to get a lot of impact out of that. All of this will take some upfront teaching.
Yeah,
But once they've got it, and then when you do it often enough, it will become like second nature. And again, be upfront about why you're doing it.
yeah. You can even have an anchor chart or some type of poster, like how do we reflect, and like some of those questions Julia was talking about, like where do I need to go next, right? What do I have solid understanding of, those types of things.
And sentence frames can do that too.
Right, and sentence frames, yeah. And that is super helpful. Then also when they're discussing, when you have them
Mhm.
turn and talk, they could pull from those sentence frames on that anchor chart poster as well. So the last part is models for mastery, and I really feel like this is super important. A lot of teachers, I think, don't do this or are scared to do this. I know I was really afraid to do this the first few times. I would put up a student's piece of work as a model of kind of what they did well. Obviously, the name was different. Sometimes I would even switch hours so the kid wasn't necessarily in the room. You can ask permission of the kid to do that. But I would show the students, here's what the student did they did well. And let's look at your paper while we're doing this. Let's highlight the differences. Let's talk through these things. It was really nerve wracking as a teacher to kind of almost like show them like the inside of your brain. Like, how do you grade? How do you think these things are? And I had a lot of teachers also think that when we show models or we show samples, it's kind of cheating. And I just wanted to really quickly discuss how these learning goals and giving them success criteria, giving them the end goal, or showing them what the end task is, or examples or models of what that looks like, is really important in the process of learning. Can we just talk about that for just a minute?
Well, I want to say something that I say a lot. So people take a lot of my classes, or they've already heard this. But what we used to call cheating, we now call learning. And
Yeah.
so showing a model, showing them an exemplar of what something should look like helps them understand where they need to go. Of course, you hear,
Right.
won't they copy? One of the things that I also used to notice is that for my struggling students, if their product was really close to my exemplar, that was okay for them. It told me where I needed to take them. It told me where they were and where they needed to go.
Right.
For my more middle of the road or high flying kids, they went, oh, I can do that and more. Watch me. And
Yeah.
so it was a way to differentiate as well.
Well, and I just read in the one of the clarity books that we have. This is like the episode of not being able to name any of our texts.
I
Right.
know. We're gonna go back and list all of them in the show
Yeah.
notes. But yes, we have a lot of things we're reading, and there's a lot of stuff floating in our brains.
Yeah. So I read the analogy. You know me, I love a good analogy. But I read the analogy where it talked about, how hard is it to use Google Maps, and it's telling you turn here, okay, go right here, 3 miles here, and your destination is ahead on the left.
Right.
Thank goodness.
And yes, it tells us where to go, but once we get there, the destination is still very unclear.
Right.
And that's really what a model for mastery does, is it puts more clarity and meaning to each of the steps that you're doing along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you show those models up front before you even begin the unit. It's a
Oh
great way
yeah.
to converse about, okay, so here's what you guys are going to create by the end of this unit. Here's what you're going to know.
Yeah. End
Let's
goal,
talk
right?
about, what do you think we need to learn in order to do this? Like, what are your fears when you look at this end product? What are the things that excite you when you look at this end product?
Yeah.
And really, what now you're creating some of that mental Velcro. But I think it's important to know, like, it's really hard to just trust Google directions when you don't exactly know what the destination is or what it
Yep.
looks like.
Yep.
And so, and then once you get there, you're still not sure. There could be 7 buildings ahead on the left. You
Yes.
don't know which building it is. And I think that happens so much in classrooms,
Yes.
where
Yes.
teachers, they do the whole thing, and all with really good intentions. And I did this.
I
can't
did
tell
it.
you how
I did
many
it.
times I would take in work and I would look at it, and every kid had a different take on my directions.
Right.
And I'm like, well, obviously I was not clear, because you did this and you did this and you did this, and I was expecting something completely different.
Right.
So
Right.
models for mastery kind of alleviates that unknown, that vague end point of learning.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, actually, you just reminded me of trying to find the doctor's office in those complexes. Like, I get,
Oh,
you know, what I'm talking about, where it's like a medical complex, and Google will get you to the medical complex, but then you've got to figure out where the doctor's office is.
Yeah.
I feel
yeah.
like that's the very same thing. Kids feel like I've gotten to class, but now there's like 300 suites I have to wade through to
Right.
figure out what she's talking about. And so, yeah, no, I think that does alleviate a lot of stress for kids. Okay, so let's move on really quick. It's just a quick follow-up question, because we're talking about mastery and we're talking about success criteria. So I just want to just note the difference in your opinions. What is the difference between success and mastery?
So success is what happens along the way. The little victories as they're moving toward success, the criteria for success. When they can meet all of the success criteria, when they've had all of those wins along the way, to me, mastery is you're done. So if you think about Super Mario, right? You have a land, and in that land, you have to or in that world, sorry, my gaming knowledge is limited here, but you have that world, and in each world there's a land you have to go through, and you have to beat each level along the way. And so at the end, you fight the big Bowser, and then you're done. You've finished that world. So to me, mastery is you're finished, and success is the little wins along the way.
Awesome. Okay. So the last concept in the domain is using the feedback cycle. And so when asked, students were able to define feedback very simply. They just know it as feedback is what helps me know where to go next. Like, that's what it is. However, teachers were a little all over the map when defining feedback. It's really broad for us as teachers. And there's a few references. Julia, do you have a few of the things that teachers typically say when we ask them to define feedback?
Well,
Yeah.
and I
Go
yeah,
ahead, Wendy.
Well, she's opening the book, so I'll answer. One of the things that teachers think is feedback is simply the check plus, check minus, or going through and adding commas where the kids didn't add commas, or putting a grade on something. But it's so much more than that, and Julia has now found the place in the book. So go for it, Miss Julia.
Well, and there's not one particular type of feedback, which is why teachers' answers are all over the place. Because again, the purpose of feedback is not actually what you give; it's what you set up for them to do with it. And so if you're doing a check plus, check minus, and you have references on the board to what each of those mean, and then what kids need to do as a result of each of those to go back and learn, then that type of feedback
Awesome.
is useful.
Yeah.
It's not useful, however, if you just put a random check, check plus, check minus, or a comment, right? And definitely not the praiseworthy ones, because those don't really help at all. Um, but feedback can be things like comments. They can be clarifications, right? They can be some type of constructive reflection. There's a lot of different things that feedback can be, but ultimately it comes back to, just like we said with formative assessment, the goal of feedback is what kids do as a result of that.
Right.
I can give a lot of really good quality written feedback all over a student assignment, but if they're not actually required to do anything
Right.
with that, then it really isn't true feedback. So,
well, how often, Julia, did you do that and watch the kids not even read it, but either go throw it in the garbage or put it in whatever filing system you had back in the day? And you're like, wait, ooh, I spent 10, 15 minutes on that one paper, and the kid didn't even spend 2 minutes reading it.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that's
Yeah.
the danger. That's the danger of feedback. You really have to have a plan in place for what you expect students to do with that. And part of making that successful is making sure that you have developed a feedback culture.
Yeah.
And a feedback culture is really where you first set up for students that you expect and need them to fail
Mm-hmm.
in this class in order to be able to move forward, in order to grow and to learn.
That's so scary.
It is so scary.
So
I remember
scary.
that was pretty close to one of the first or second things after I told students who I was, gave them some just family background about me as a person. Right after that, we talked about, okay, we got to get one thing out of the way in this class right now, and that's that I need you to fail. If you don't fail, we're not going to learn. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm going to fail too.
Right.
I don't fail, I don't learn. So there's going to be times where an activity we have planned doesn't go the way I wanted it to. And I'm just going to be honest with you. I'll take some feedback and some suggestions and we'll move forward. But a feedback culture really sets up where you're comfortable failing, which means then you're comfortable, because the teacher, I always told the kids, let the grade take care of itself, right? I would say, I'm not going to penalize you for trying and trying and trying in that grade book. So we'll deal with the grade book as it comes, because I want to pay more attention to your learning, but I will take care of that. And so you create that culture where they're not afraid to fail. They're not afraid to try something new or try something different. And then that means that in return, they expect that you're going to give them some feedback based on that failure so that they know where to go next. And you have structures and processes in place where they are actually reflecting on that feedback, writing a reflection about where they're going to go next based off of that, how they're going to check back in, all of those different things. So really it's about creating a feedback culture. And in the book, I actually have a title right now, Visible Learning Feedback by John Hattie and Shirley Clark. One of the lines it says in a feedback culture, and it gives a whole list of things that create a feedback culture, but I love the line that says feedback needs to be task rather than ego related.
Ooh.
Yep.
Oh yeah. Okay. And that goes for like ego, like, great job. You're the best writer I've ever seen. As well as something like, you've got to learn to use your better words in this or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's funny that you brought up the ego. I've been reading another book that I can't name. But I know we're really, I got to have more stuff in front of me. But I think when you're talking about a feedback culture, like you said, you're talking about the teacher also having to model struggles, which takes a lot of humility. The only way students are going to be able to be trained, I think, in this culture, because it's going to be such a shift from what they're used to. And a lot of students do worry, and parents, about the grade and how they're going to do. So the feedback obviously needs to be in a safe and structured environment, but it's a slow, gradual thing as they see teachers modeling for them humility and mistakes and failures, and then also immediately giving them feedback on theirs as well, and not penalizing them, like you said, for the learning process. That really does help students kind of get the book called it, in their brain, their inner dictator starts to run on, basically, and their ego just goes, nope, I don't want to accept any of this feedback because I want to prove myself. So your brain immediately, when you do receive feedback or any type of constructive criticism or anything like that, your brain automatically goes into what they call proving mode. You want to prove yourself. You want to prove that you were right. You want to prove why it was the way it was. And so you have to kind of retrain students' brains and our own brains to go into improving mode, what they call improving mode, in which you can take feedback and all of a sudden, instead of trying to prove what you've done, you actually go, oh, this is how I can improve next time. So it's very interesting.
Well, and I like what you said about the teacher modeling that. If I were to go back to the classroom, I think initially at the beginning of the year, I would actually model for them what it means to have feedback
Yeah.
and what it means to graciously accept it and
Yes.
grow from it. So I'm thinking
Mm-hmm.
I would probably, once we're into the first or second week, I would come back the next day and say, how did yesterday go in our ELA time?
Yeah.
What do you think I did that really worked for you? What did I do where you felt really disconnected? What do you think I could do different moving forward? And if you model those conversations with them, it's just
Yep.
like you said, Britt, you're giving them that under, because really what in life teaches people how to graciously accept feedback and grow from it.
Some of us are still learning how to graciously accept feedback and
Well,
learn from
I
it.
don't even think you can. I mean, I think it's always a battle. I think your brain's always going to want to go into prove yourself mode. And I think it's training ourselves to just take that second and go, wait, no, let's use my humility, right? To put away my ego for just a bit. How can I improve on what they're saying? And hear them and listen and not jump in and interrupt, you know?
So let me bring this full circle, if I may. We're talking about a feedback culture and being safe.
Yes,
If
safe and structured.
if you, both of you, Julia and Brett, offer me constructive feedback, you put so many deposits in my emotional bank account that even though it might sting, I know that
Yes.
you have my best interests at heart, and you care about me and want to help me. But
Hmm.
if somebody who is not very kind to me or not very supportive of me offers feedback, no matter how constructive that feedback may be, it's going to hurt, or I'm going to feel more resentful. I'm going to be less likely to accept it and be willing to change. So
You might not
ultimately,
even you might not even hear it
oh, I might
because
not,
you've already
I
put the
shut
walls up.
down. Correct.
Yeah.
And so, as teachers, we need to remember that kids have to feel that they're safe with us, that we truly are benevolent, that we have their best interests at heart always.
Yeah, so that they can end up making a great product, what they're proud of, right? And so that's the end goal, is that they can be proud of their learning. Okay, the one thing I do want to talk about, and I just really don't like it, and I don't know, maybe you guys like it, is the feedback sandwich where you give
Um,
positive feedback and then you do your little like constructive criticism, blah blah blah, and then you follow it up with positive feedback. That's never really worked for me as a person, but also even when I tried it with kids or I've tried it coaching, because you just know it's coming. Like, you know, they're saying something positive because
they'll
they're
hit
about to
everything.
say something not nice.
Yeah.
And you're like, so you kind of ignore the positive and it becomes kind of like cheapened. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I just feel like instead of doing these little feedback sandwiches all over the place, like Wendy said, we do have to build the culture. And like, Julia was saying, it has to feel safe all the time, because if it doesn't feel safe, that feedback sandwich is going to seem really empty.
Right. And so actually there is some pretty strong research that whatever was said last
Mm.
or written last is what we take away most.
So if you say it in the middle and you
It
end with,
is
It's
they're not
lost.
gonna hear it.
it gets lost. But I
Okay.
really like the point that you were making, Britt. If you've established this culture every day, all the time, then you don't need a feedback sandwich. You only need a feedback sandwich,
When feedback is an event,
when feedback
right?
is an
Yes.
event.
Yes.
Versus a process in your classroom,
Something that
right?
just
A
happens
routine in your classroom.
naturally and all the time. So I think that's what you have to remember. If I never say anything nice to Julia, and then I come in and say, Well, on this piece of writing, Julia, I really liked how you used some interesting words. And then I say, none of it was understandable. Of course, you're going to have to redo the entire thing. Oh, but you also divided your paragraphs correctly. I mean, really?
I know. I'm not a huge fan of it. But I feel like it's something people reach to because
Absolutely.
they don't know how to create the culture,
And
right?
and they've reached to it with good intentions.
Right.
Oh, yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah,
I've
yeah.
been
I'm
there.
not.
I've done it.
Me too.
Oh, I've done it all the time, and as I've used it, and also it's been used on me. I'm like, this is a crap sandwich.
Oh, are we allowed to say that on a district podcast?
Yes, you can.
Okay, just
So
checking.
what two steps? Okay, so it's hard. I think to shift into a feedback culture and make it a routine, as Julia was saying, or a habit. What are two small steps that teachers can take to begin creating this culture of feedback? Just two tiny steps forward if they're like, Britt, Julia, Wendy, I'm doing all the things you were saying, and now I'm realizing I need to do them in a different way. How do we shift that and help teachers move towards that culture of feedback?
So first, I would say model
Okay.
feedback. Model, just like we were saying, because you can have the best of intentions and give students some feedback on something, but if you've really not modeled for them how to hear feedback and then make a step forward based off of it, then it's always going to stay just the words on a page or just something you've said to them. So you need to model as the teacher, whether you're creating a fake scenario or you're just modeling off of yourself. Like I said earlier, that you're, how did yesterday go? Give me some feedback. Okay, what should my next steps be then when I teach you guys about this? And then the second thing is I would give them those sentence frames and those structures that lead them to that same type of thinking every time you give it. Because
Okay.
again, I'm more concerned with what you're having them do with the feedback than the feedback itself, if that makes
Okay.
sense. The feedback
Yeah.
itself is important, but
Right.
if it's the best feedback in the world and they don't do anything with it, it's useless.
It's just hanging out there. Yeah. So the two small steps you would say would be modeling and then just making sure we give them the frames and uh, just helping them along of how to speak with feedback to others, but also like receive the feedback, and that would help kind of create the culture. Wendy, did you have anything to add on the two small steps?
Well, I have so much to add that it's problematic.
Okay.
Actually, no, I definitely agree with Julia, and probably the biggest or most important thing I would do would be the sentence stems. I'm a believer in those for everything, and I think that those provide a safety net for kids when we're talking about how you respond to feedback or how you give feedback. And so don't hesitate to use those to teach them to students. The other thing that I would really take some time to do, because this is so important, is do some reading. If you don't have time to read a book, Julia's mentioned a book here, there are plenty of texts online. Get clear in your own mind, if this podcast didn't do it for you, about what assessment is and what feedback is, so that you can execute it skillfully.
And if you're looking for more structured ways to do feedback or to do feedback conversations with students, during the shutdown, I did a digital class on feedback. And in that, there are three different templates. So we will link
Yep.
that. And then we'll also link the templates as
Awesome.
well.
That's going to be great. Okay. All right. So we're going to move into rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Yes.
We're not supposed to be ready for
Well,
rapid
I
fire
mean, do you
questions,
feel like you're
right?
breathing and emotionally stable?
Sure. Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
So the first one, this is going to be related to obviously education, but assessment is fill in the blank.
Harder than it seems.
For sure. Yeah.
Assessment is absolutely integral for teaching and for learning and for students to move forward.
Great. Number 2, what would you tell your early teacher self, so years 1 through 4-ish, about assessing students with what you know now about assessment?
I would do a play off of the Hamilton line, talk less, smile more. But I would say grade less, check in more.
Okay, she must have looked at these questions ahead of time because that's wrong.
I'm a planner.
I like living on the edge. I would say stop giving quizzes that are, number 1, what color was the girl's hair? Number 2, what's 2 plus 4? And I would stop giving those 100-question tests.
Okay.
That are all basic knowledge. And I gave those for way more than just years 1 through 4, by the way.
Yeah, and we might need to have an episode on how to grade less and check in more.
I do have a class.
We do.
Grading.
It is. The bane of your existence, I think, is the end of it.
The bane of my existence.
So we definitely, we'll talk about that maybe in a couple future episodes. Okay. What do you think people misunderstand the most about assessment?
That it's something we do at the end in order to move on.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's probably the thing we misunderstand the most as well, or that it's only mandated assessment.
Right. Or it's a gotcha.
Oh, yeah.
I also think people think of it as just kind of in kids, it's the moment where they're going to, it's a gotcha moment,
right?
Instead of a learning moment or a learning tool.
Right.
All right. So 4, what is your educational nemesis? Like if you're the superhero, what would you be fighting?
So I'm going to just generalize like a group, and we hear this a lot. And it is any teacher who says they already do all of this. I already do all of this. Yes. Well, none of us do all of this,
no,
right? And to me, that's a line that says I don't need to learn anymore.
Yeah.
When the teachers stop learning, the students stop learning.
Oh,
we do hear
that's good.
Well, yeah, I didn't make it up. Please know that.
Her conscience is kicking in there.
My conscience is kicking in. It's on the coaching handbook, actually. But that would be my nemesis too. And Julie and I did not talk about this ahead of time. We hear that all the time. I already do this. I already know this. But we're not seeing it. Mm-hmm. And so that being closed off to learning. And if we're the heroes, we need to come up with a name for that nemesis, like know-it-all Nelly, or I don't know, something.
Know-it-all Nellies.
Because when I'm not in my loving, kind mode, it makes me want to say, great, I'll be out tomorrow to see what you're doing with your students.
Right.
Right. If you're not open to learning, if you're not open to feedback yourself, then I'm not sure how you can teach kids.
I think your educational nemesis comes back to exactly what we were talking about with the ego and formative assessments and feedback, right? They go into proving mode and not improving mode. They're just like, if they can't do that, it's like you said, Wendy, how's the culture going to be built if they can't even take new information? So,
and if their sense is I'm the teacher, you're the learner, that we have those very divided roles, then that's part of the problem as well.
The culture of feedback for assessment to work is going to be really hard in those types of situations. So, all right, last question. In your opinion, what is the ugliest vegetable?
The artichoke.
What? The artichoke? I don't like artichokes, and I think they're beautiful too.
No, they're too spiky and bold. I know.
Okay, that describes me.
They're creepy. You're not creepy, Wendy.
They're not creepy. Okay.
That's what you see, but I think this is a great personality catch between the two of us. Like, she likes bold things.
I think if you're listening to this podcast, you should go ask your colleagues this question.
Well, Wendy, what do you think is the ugliest vegetable?
Oh, the potato. Okay, it's brown and dusty and blobby.
Blobby?
It isn't blob. It's like a blob.
No, it's classic. It's consistent. It always looks the same. It's not.
Oh my gosh.
You always know what to expect from the potato. The artichoke is a little unknown to me.
Which is what makes it beautiful. And I think I have purple flowers or something. I'm gonna have to Google it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Wendy's favorite color is purple. But I think the ugliest vegetable arguments here that are happening is a great way to talk about modeling constructive criticisms because clearly they have differentiation in their
So I
opinion.
could be saying something like, well, I'm not sure I understand why you believe the
Yeah,
artichoke.
you should really be using
Or I
better
would like to
sentence
respectfully
stems.
disagree with you. Yeah, no, we're going to be fighting about this when we go back into the office.
Yeah, I think it's a great question to ask people, especially to set them off their guard a little bit, get them comfortable. Because as we know, if we can get people comfortable, we can give them more feedback.
You should have asked this right up front.
I should have.
What's your pick?
Yeah.
What's the ugliest
Me?
vegetable?
No, I'm the host.
Oh, sweetie.
You know what? I didn't actually think about this. Ugliest vegetable. Oh gosh, I can't think.
You wrote the question.
No, I didn't think about it. Well, I guess I know it's really bad. I guess the ugliest vegetable to me would probably be, and this is weird, but
She's stalling.
She's wanting to say the artichoke.
No,
and she just
I
doesn't
want to say,
but
is mushroom a vegetable?
it's a fungus, but I would actually call it a vegetable.
Okay, I don't know what category it's in, but it bothers me to a deep, deep level because
Really?
it's
Britt, I'm with you.
Oh no,
I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of the look of the mushroom.
Yeah.
They're lovely.
See, I just see them as like
Oh.
I know they're a fungus. I don't want to eat a fungus. I don't know. It's weird.
Wait. You don't like mushrooms?
No, I will eat them.
Neither do I.
But I won't
You-
like choose. I would never like be like today I'm going to go to the store and get
Okay,
mushrooms
yeah,
for dinner. Like I would never do that.
I don't know if I've ever told either of you this before, but when I was a child, I always got a can of mushrooms in my Christmas stocking from Santa.
Did you really?
That's how much I love mushrooms.
oh
My
goodness.
favorite soup is mushroom soup.
See, and yeah, no, I'm not there for that. I want the orange in my Santa stocking. I don't want the mushroom soup.
And I like pickled beets.
What?
That's
Okay,
weird.
now that's
Okay,
okay. We're
wait.
in a whole
I-
rabbit hole.
We need to pack up our stuff and
And
get
go,
out of
yeah.
here because I don't want to have a bad working relationship with the two of you over.
No, we're fine because we have
Mushrooms
we've modeled
Pickled
humility,
beets.
so that's good.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. In our next episode, we are going to discuss our favorite books. We're going to provide a on-air book tasting of what we are reading currently in education and how what we're reading is changing the way we see learning. So I think that's going to be a fun little on-air book tasting for the next episode. Thank you so much, ladies, for coming on today and talking about assessment.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Learning Unlocked and finding out more about assessments and feedback. If you have listened today as a GPS educator, you can receive PD recertification credit by visiting our Employee Hub page and navigating to professional growth and then digital PD courses. Just a reminder that we are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at GPS Prof Growth. That's at GPS PROF GROWTH. For more information or the resources and all the books we didn't cite from this episode, please visit our website at learningunlocked.libsyn.com/website. We are distributed by Libsyn to Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Audible. Episodes are also available on our PGD YouTube channel under playlists. Our intro and outro music are licensed from Melody Loops. Thanks again, key holders. Keep unlocking curiosity, creativity, and innovation with your students. Stay kind and courageous, and I'll see you next time.